Stars off the silver screen, they've been stuck in the mud in Manitoba. Yeah, musicians and athletes, some of the best you ever seen, stuck in the mud in Manitoba. When people cross the country, no matter where they go, they come back to the middle, to our Manitoba home. Back to friendships and memories, some of the best they've ever known, stuck in the mud in Manitoba. The Manitoba mud is so plain to see. The Manitoba mud is the place to be. If you think I should move, go climb a tree. Stuck in the mud in Manitoba.
Hello and welcome. We're so pleased that you could join us today for MAMPA's first and maybe last, or maybe one of many, we'll see, virtual conferences. I'm Christina Mays-Nino. I'm the Executive Director of the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association, or MAMPA. What is MAMPA? We're a member-based association supporting nonprofit housing providers and partners through education, networking, capacity building, and information so that nonprofit housing in Manitoba is secure, sustainable, and affordable for all who need it. If you have any technical problems or access issues today, you can contact Bonnie through the chat box or by phone. So if you haven't used Zoom webinars in the past, the chat feature should be at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a little cartoon bubble. It says chat, and you get a little red dot whenever someone writes something in the chat box. So you can select who you write to, and Bonnie is our moderator, so you can write in there, or to Tammy or anyone there. You can write to everyone. Just say that you're having issues and we'll sort them out together. We're recording this session and it's going to be available for all of our attendees afterwards to share. If we're sending links or other information in the chat box, we'll be sending those to you as well. So you don't need to furiously write them all down. I'd like to recognize that I and our speaker today are presenting from Treaty 1 territory, the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the treaties made and the promises broken, and the harms of colonization that include harmful impacts on the homes and housing circumstances of Indigenous peoples on the territories. Many of you are joining us from other treaty territories today, and I'd like to acknowledge those. I asked an elder that we've worked with in the past today if it'd be appropriate to bring tobacco and ask for an opening for this conference. And after some discussion, they suggested we should wait until we can meet again in person. I want to say that today I'm thinking of the elders in our communities and the important work they do. And I hope that we as communities can do a better job of keeping them safe and keeping each other safe at this challenging time. I know how much members of MAMPA have done over the past 8 months to create and preserve safe homes for people, including many elders across Manitoba. Today, we're kicking off our conference, and we'll have greetings from our board president, Debbie Van Ettinger, from Minister Ahmed Hussein, from Minister Heather Stephenson, Councillor Cindy Gilroy, Evan Siddall and Pam Hine from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and then a presentation followed by a Q&A with Manitoba Housing CEO, Joe Bradbury. We'll wrap up by 1 p.m. Central Time. We want to hear from you, and we're going to have some polls to keep you engaged. And I suggest you prepare your questions for Joe. So you'll see in your screen that there's a chat feature and there's a Q&A feature. So the Q&A feature is for questions for Joe. You can enter those in any time, including when we're speaking, when he's speaking. That's the list I'll use to choose the questions for Joe. The chat feature is for all other discussion. So if you want to chat with each other, if you want to share questions with each other, introduce yourselves, use the chat feature. Questions for Joe, go in the Q&A. And speaking of interactive, here is our first poll to get you warmed up. So poll number 1 is, where are you joining us from today? So we built this poll when we were when we had 15 registrants just last week. We now have over 100 people registered to attend. So that's very exciting. We're so glad that so many people are joining us. We'll give you a couple more seconds. About 80% of people have voted. 83% have voted. We're going to close the poll soon, so last chance. Looks like the majority of folks are from Winnipeg, but we also have 4 people from other places in Manitoba, 4 people from other places in Canada, someone from Brandon, a couple of people from Steinbach, and a couple from Winkler. So we can, it looks like most people are going to respond who are going to. So you can see the poll results there. You can see where everyone's joining from. Did you know that MANFA has, sorry, my notes are tucked behind my camera on my computer. So MANFA has 25 communities across Manitoba represented in our membership. So we'll have more polls later on. Thanks. And we're going to have a number of video greetings now. There are different ways to display your videos. So when we play a video, it should pop up into full screen automatically. Around the top of your screen is typically where you choose your speaker view, so you can play around with it and see what you like best. And here is a video from our board president, Debbie Van Ettinger, to welcome you to Building Partnerships.
Good morning, everyone. The Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association, MANFA, is proud to welcome you to our annual Affordable Housing Conference, Building Partnerships. Building Partnerships is an opportunity to be immersed in the issues that matter to nonprofit housing in Manitoba. And this year, we will be able to engage our issues over 5 months rather than only 2 days. This year's conference is themed Social Housing Transformation. While a lot is changing, some things have remained consistent. Housing is health and housing is dignity. The nonprofit housing sector has come together to support each other through the difficult times of COVID-19. We will need to similarly collaborate through Manitoba Housing's devolution, the end of operating agreements, increased housing affordability challenges, and other changes the sector will face. We selected speakers, panelists, presenters, and workshop facilitators who will inspire us with new ideas, educate us on what has been proven to work, and engage us to learn and adjust our practices. Sponsors of Building Partnerships have been understanding and dedicated in their support as we adjust to this new format, and once again have helped make this event possible. Please check out our sponsor page, which serves as a virtual trade show this year, and check back regularly for some great prize raffles. We have created opportunities during Building Partnerships to network and meet with your colleagues. Sessions will be interactive, even if we are apart. Thank you for attending the Building Partnerships Conference. We know this will certainly be a year to remember.
Thank you to Debbie and to the board of MANFA for all of your support to the sector at this time. And thank you to the conference planning committee. Without them, this event wouldn't have been possible. They're listed in the program. If you haven't received a program, you can download it. It's on our website, and there should be a link in the chat box now. And thank you to the MANFA staff team, to Si Chen, who is our coordinator of member services and education, and has been doing a ton of work behind the scenes to make this conference possible. And Cheryl Krostowicz, who just joined us at MANFA as part of our transformation team lead. And we also have a practicum student who's been helping out and giving lots of feedback into our conference sessions, Melissa Waukee. We're also working with ITM events this year to make sure we have limited technical challenges as we move into this new world. Thank you to Bonnie and her team for all of your help with the conference. So what is the conference this year? Well, we've heard loud and clear that our members didn't want to sit at a computer for 1 or 2 days straight participating virtually. So we've designed a series of inspirational and expert speakers, engaging workshops, and they're spread out over the next 5 months, usually 2 per month. So save your Tuesday lunch hours for MANFA. If you're not registered for the full conference, we encourage you to do so. We're going to encourage you lots today. The conference theme this year is social housing transformation. How is social housing transforming? Well, we've always been changing. Without change, there is no progress. But this is massive. We've had long-standing agreements and funding arrangements that are changing. The government of Manitoba has specifically stated that concern with the number and complexity of funding agreements and a desire to move towards subsidizing individuals and households rather than units and organizations. Our former board chair, Lori Socha, always spoke about the end of existing funding and operating agreements as leaving the nest. I prefer a metaphor of youth aging out of the care of child and family services. Many of our agreements signed 20, 30, 40 years ago either prevent or at least don't encourage organizations to make financial and governance decisions, to manage assets or leverage their equity to create more housing, and to build the partnerships, especially within the sector, that we need to be successful. Despite good intentions and dedication from our partners at Manitoba Housing, being in care isn't always a positive experience. And we want and need something different if our sector is to thrive. But that something different can't be us dropped off at the curb, holding garbage bags on our own without support. The consequences for the tenants who need housing are too dire. At the same time as existing funding agreements are ending, Manitoba Housing is transforming itself from a direct service provider to a funder and a regulator. The Sector Transformation Committee of MAMFA has developed a vision for this transformation, a vision for the outcome, for a nonprofit-led and government-supported, client-centered, community-integrated, well-managed and governed, consistent system of housing. It's clear that social housing, the funding, the regulation, the planning frameworks for social housing, that's all a responsibility of government. They have an obligation to the progressive achievement of a right to housing for all. The nonprofit sector, philanthropy, and all of the goodwill we have together can't replace that. But the nonprofit sector can manage housing and can and do make strategic decisions about the capital needs, partnerships, supports, and operations within social housing. Nonprofit boards and employees make those decisions in the best interests of the communities and individuals we serve. That's why we exist. Getting to the place where the nonprofit sector is governing and managing social housing at the scale necessary to take on much of Manitoba housing stock is a significant transformation. It's a transformation that, done right, will lead to opportunities for new and renewed development that have not been available to us to date. So now our next poll coming up, they get harder, you'll see as we go. The next poll is, what do you feel when you hear the talk about social housing transformation? So some of you, this is a brand new conversation, so you might not know much about it, that's fine. You can actually select multiple answers to this, so you can choose more than one emotion. I think many of us have mixed emotions about transformation of social housing. So we have almost half of folks have voted. We're at 75%. A few more seconds. It's almost an even split, which is, I knew there'd be mixed emotions, but I didn't know they'd be so mixed. All right, I think we can close the poll and share it. So the most common emotion that we're feeling with housing transformation is anticipation. Anticipation. And the second most common is enthusiasm. So followed closely by anxiety, confusion, and vulnerability. So that's great. We knew that there would be mixed emotions. We know that there are mixed emotions about Manitoba housing transformation. And the first session that we're holding as part of the conference on November 10th is called Pitfalls and Possibilities for that reason. We'll be getting input from housing leaders in the Netherlands, in the United Kingdom, in San Diego, on how their own housing systems, in particular the funding and financing models, have transformed in recent years, so we can learn from their experiences. Not everything in the conference will be about these bigger ideas related to major change. Transformation can be about doing things you already do in a more sustainable way. We'll also have workshops, interactive workshops on developing budgets, making strategic decisions, and developing partnerships for tenant services. So now poll number 3 is, what series of the conference are you looking forward to the most? So we've put our 4 conference series up there. There's funding and financing, tenant health and well-being, leadership and governance, and partnerships and collaborations. So let us know which one you're looking forward to the most. About half of people have voted. Looks like partnership and collaborations is in the lead so far. Give you a couple more seconds. All right, almost everyone has voted, so I think we can close the poll, and you can see partnership and collaborations is the most popular one that folks are looking forward to the most, followed by funding and financing. A few can't decide, and that's fine because you can go to all of them. We'll be sending details about each event as they come up. You may want to get together as a staff team or a board to participate in the sessions, and if you can do that safely, we encourage it. We'll be raffling off a lunch delivered to the groups that are participating together for each series, 1 lunch per series. The first group who will get a lunch during series 1 is Sarah Riel. Congratulations, Sarah Riel. We'll be in touch to talk about lunch plans for either November 10th, 17th, or 24th. And speaking of raffles, have you seen our trade show? I know that trade shows are great for the pens, for the chocolates, and the other neat things that you think you never needed, like an envelope opener with a light on it or something like that. And of course, for the business cards and connections. Well, we'll still have the contacts and the connections, and we'll have awesome prizes, not just pens. This month, we're raffling off a Lenovo Tab 4. And so when you go to the trade show, you'll see the link in the chat box now. You'll get a pop-up where you'll enter your contact information. And then at the end of each series, we'll select 1 prize winner for each of those, for that prize. We'll have a different prize each series, different prize winner each series. So keep checking the trade show. The trade show recognizes our sponsors, and I want to recognize them again. We didn't know what their response to a virtual conference would be, but our sponsors are longstanding partners of the nonprofit housing sector, and they were really supportive of this new format. Thank you again for everything you do for MAMPA and our members. Now we'll have greetings from the Honorable Ahmed Hussein, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone, I'm Ahmed Hussein, Minister for Families, Children and Social Development. I'm very pleased to participate in your conference. COVID-19 has had many impacts on Canadians, but the most vulnerable have been especially impacted by its effects. And many of those individuals are residents in your housing developments. So I want to thank the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association for everything that you do to provide affordable housing to the most vulnerable Manitobans. Our government's priorities with respect to affordable housing are reflected in the National Housing Strategy, a 10-year, $55 billion plan to ensure that every Canadian has a safe and affordable place to call home. But our work is not done. As you've seen in the speech from the throne, we've committed to eliminating chronic homelessness in Canada. We've also introduced the Rapid Housing Initiative, a $1 billion program to house the most vulnerable Canadians who have been affected by the pandemic. So thank you for everything that you do, and best wishes on your conference.
The Honourable Heather Stefanson, Minister of Families from the province of Manitoba, regrets that due to unforeseen circumstances and changes in her schedule, she was unable to send video greetings for us today, but she did pass on her greetings for me to share on her behalf. The Minister would like to thank the volunteer boards and staff members for their tireless efforts providing safe and affordable housing to thousands of families and seniors across the province. Housing is a vital part of the foundation for the health of our communities. Manitobans want to live, work, and play in the communities they love. They want to be close to family and close to the natural beauty that our province has to offer. As fellow members of MAMFA, you collectively face similar challenges and earn similar successes. The Minister believes that collaboration and supported partnerships formed and supported here will enhance the collective capacity of nonprofit housing providers. The importance of those connections, especially during a pandemic as we socially distance and take other steps to stay healthy and safe, just cannot be understated. The Manitoba government recognizes that the issues of affordable housing are complex and require ongoing collaboration of governments, communities, and service providers. Only by working in partnership can we collectively respond to the needs of Manitobans of all ages and assist them to enhance their personal opportunities. The nonprofit housing sector plays a key role in affordable housing provision for Manitobans in need, and the Manitoba government looks forward to continuing their partnership with the federal government to support the sector's continued strength and growth. Engagement between federal and provincial officials for the National Housing Strategy is ongoing. Government of Manitoba officials continue working with the federal government to discuss partnerships for improved program sustainability so that they can continue to serve low-income households and meet community priorities. This is why the government is pleased to endorse the bilateral agreement under the National Housing Strategy in June 2019, representing $225.4 million in federal funding to help address the housing needs of Manitobans between 2019 and 20 to 2027-28. Manitoba Housing continues to build collaborative partnerships with community organizations, private and nonprofit partners, and other levels of government toward the provision of safe and affordable housing. They believe that localized management of subsidized housing allows for practical, sustainable, and community-driven approach to the delivery of social and affordable housing. The Manitoba government recognizes that housing is a shared responsibility and looks forward to working in partnership with all levels of government and community stakeholders in the private sector to address the housing needs of Manitobans. They believe that everyone deserves access to safe and affordable housing, and they are committed to providing communities with the support needed to build capacity and develop community-based solutions to addressing housing needs. Once again, the Manitoba government recognizes the valuable work that is done by the nonprofit housing sector throughout the province. The Minister would like to express her appreciation for MAMFA and for the valuable efforts of all staff and volunteers in strengthening our communities and supporting those most in need. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you to Minister Stephenson for sending those greetings. And now we're going to have greetings from Councillor Cindy Gilroy. You'll notice when it pops up, the video looks a bit different. She recorded it on her cell phone after a day of meetings, so the image will appear vertical. It's not your computer or your phone, don't worry. And Cindy is bringing greetings from the city of Winnipeg.
It's an honor for me to be here today at your 8th Annual Non-for-Profit Housing Association Conference. I really want to thank all the people that made this conference happen. This is a virtual conference, and a lot of this takes a lot of effort, and I can imagine how much time and dedication it took to get this conference going. So I really want to thank everybody for that, and I also want to thank those that are being a key partner here and making sure that they're participating. We learn a lot from one another, and so I think that that's really important, that these conferences keep going, even if it is virtually, so we can learn from one another. And this year's topic is about building partnerships, and I just love that topic because I really believe that that is the key on how we move forward in safe and affordable housing. I know that I've been building some of my partnerships in different municipalities across the country, so we can learn from one another on what they're doing in different municipalities in terms of affordable housing. I also was part of the group that was advocating for more dollars coming down to municipalities so we can help partners like you leverage the dollars they're needed to get their projects on the ground and up and running. The City of Winnipeg is also looking at an affordable housing strategy. We know that you're a key partner in how we move forward, and we look forward to making sure that we're a key partner in affordable housing, as we know there's a huge need and we could be a key partner in working with you to build safe and affordable housing. I hope you have a wonderful conference and a wonderful day.
Thank you to Cindy Gilroy, and we're pleased that the CEO of Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation could send greetings to us today as well. And here is Evan Siddall.
Hi everyone, I'm pleased to be able to speak to you today. I'm joining you from Toronto, and I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you therefore from the traditional land of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee and Wendat peoples, as well as many individuals who themselves are Métis Inuit or members of other First Nations. And Toronto itself is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit, with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Il ne fait aucun doute que votre conférence est très différente cette année. La pandémie de COVID-19 nous a tous appelés à nous adapter, bien sûr. Comme nous avons tous été appelés à nous abriter sur place pour freiner la propagation de COVID-19, vous avez fait des efforts extraordinaires pour garder vos résidents logés et en sécurité. J'apprécie votre dévouement et votre compassion en ce temps difficile. Recent events over the past months have also highlighted inequalities in our society, and particularly systematic racism faced by Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people in Canada. Your work to promote more affordable housing for these people in particular is vital to building a more inclusive and equitable future for our country. At CMHC, these events have given our work more pertinence and urgency, to be sure. I believe you feel the same way. And we're therefore more committed than ever to our aspiration that by 2030, everyone in Canada will have a home that meets their needs and that they can afford. We've worked quickly to develop programs, rent relief programs, mortgage relief programs, but also the Rapid Housing Initiative to respond to the immediate needs caused by the pandemic. And at the same time, as Minister Hussen just told you, we're making strong progress on our national housing strategy objectives. We also recently developed at CMHC an anti-racism and equity action plan. You can find these online. Among other actions, we're looking at all our programs and policies through a racialized lens. We want to support your work in breaking down systemic housing challenges to build a better future for all. I understand the theme of your conference this year is partnership, and I'll end there by saying that certainly the partnership of the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association and all of its members is of utmost importance to us as we do our job. Simply said, we can't meet our audacious goal alone. Whether we're collaborating on a project or improving processes based on your feedback, any progress we make at CMHC is progress we make together with you. This December, my term as CEO of CMHC will come to an end, but I'll be leaving an organization that is much more innovative, that I'm sure you agree is more client-focused, and is entirely open, indeed insistent, on working with partners to achieve our goals. You can count on us to help others make housing safe and affordable for all in these times and for generations to come. Merci beaucoup et bonne conférence.
Thank you to Evan. And now is our first guest to bring live greetings, which is very exciting. Pam Hine is here she is the Vice President of Partnerships and Promotions with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. I had the great privilege of serving on the board of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association with Pam, and it's great to see her here at our conference, joining us all the way from Whitehorse. Welcome, Pam.
Welcome, Christina, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and address your conference this morning. I'd like to first start to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tonquitchin Council, and I want to thank them for the privilege to live, work, and play on their beautiful land. It's the virtual conference today is just a small example of how the nonprofit housing sector has had to adapt to address COVID-19 and keeping your members and your residents safe. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to meet with you, albeit virtually, in my new role as Vice President of Partnership and Promotions for CMHC. I was so excited when I saw the theme of this year's conference, Building Partnership and Social Housing Transformation. Before joining CMHC, I had the privilege to work with all 3 territorial housing corporations. My experience in delivering community housing in small northern remote communities required transformation through partnerships. It required all levels of government, Indigenous organizations, and nonprofit housing providers to work side by side to address the housing needs of our citizens. By working together, we not only create additional housing units, we're also able to learn from one another, and in doing so, transforming our housing sector. You heard Evan reiterate our commitment to our aspiration that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and meets their need. Our team is focused on this inspiration by working with associations like yours, working with all levels of government like the province of Manitoba and municipalities, and also with bringing new players to the table to work together to achieve our common goals. Over the next several months, we will be looking forward to advancing the success of the National Housing Strategy, particularly the bilateral agreement with the province of Manitoba. Through this initiative, we are finalizing details with the province on the Canada-Manitoba housing benefit, and we look forward to seeing it delivered in the near future. We've also been closely following the province's plan to transform the housing sector, and we've actively participated on the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association's Transformation Committee, because we see the importance for the sector to play a larger role in owning and operating community housing. Our interest is to ensure the long-term viability of community housing. Our financing tools, affordable housing programs, and resources are available to support your sector. And as a partner, we will continue to look for opportunities to work with you. As both Evan and the Minister have mentioned in their video addresses, we will also be rolling out the Rapid Housing Initiative in the coming weeks to respond directly and quickly to the housing challenges of vulnerable populations in the face of a global pandemic. I applaud the work of the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association and its members and have done in building a strong, resilient sector, and have been able to continue to provide safe, affordable housing at a time when having a place to call home is more important than ever. I look forward to the opportunity to work with each of you in building our partnership now and into the future. Thank you again for the opportunity to address you this morning, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Thanks so much, Pam. I know we have lots of folks from CMHC joining us today, and we're so glad that you could be here and for all of your support. And now I would like to invite our conference guest, Joe Bradbury. Joe is the CEO of Manitoba Housing. He joined us in Manitoba in July this year. So because of the circumstances, we know this is the first time many of you will be meeting him. And it may be some time before we meet him face to face. I've been really fortunate that Joe's been connected with MANPA since he arrived. We got him out to a board meeting. So we've been able to connect with him. Joe is going to speak about his vision for social housing transformation for about 20 minutes. And as he does, please go ahead and you can put questions in the Q&A. I'll be collecting them and I'll ask them when it's time. So welcome, Joe.
Good morning. How is everyone? or afternoon. So I'm Joe Bradbury. I'm the CEO of Manitoba Housing, and it's such a privilege to be here with you guys virtually, although I'm broadcasting live from the legislature. So bear with the background. I'm in one of the offices here, just coming out of a meeting. So basically, a little bit about who I am and what I kind of stand for as an individual. I've spent my last 20 years of my career basically advocating and working for the vulnerable in our communities, making sure that they have a place to live, a place to work, and also, to have basically an opportunity to make a living. It's about basically connecting different resources to the individuals that we both and all serve. So why I'm here at Manitoba Housing is to kind of make a difference. A big core part of when you start in a new organization, and I've been here about 3 months, learning and listening to folks at both MANFA and a number of our not-for-profits. And for those that I have not met yet, I do invite you to schedule a meeting with me to have an opportunity for me to listen to what your issues are and what your concerns are. And let's see if we can partner together and resolve some of them. So moving forward, in terms of where we want to go and what we want to do, it is all about partnerships. It's about partnerships with the federal government. It's partnerships with our municipalities. It's about partnerships with our not-for-profit sector and empowering our not-for-profit sector to literally collectively work towards solving some of the key fundamental issues facing our sector. We have significant infrastructure in this province that is quite old, so to speak. Some of the infrastructure needs more energy efficient components attached to it. Some of them just need some infrastructure, in terms of renewal. And so a part of our approach is basically figuring out how do we empower the local sector to allow for local decision making. How do we basically become more active in terms of taking a whole of government approach? And the whole of government approach, I hope, is not new to some folks, but it's not just about housing. It's about other sectors. It's about looking at how do we better interact mental health and addictions into the sector? How do we better interact employment into the sector? How do we better serve the youth that are exiting care, that are coming out of our programs? And most of all, how do we enable you guys to help address some of these issues and, figuring out how do we solve and impact homelessness? And, looking at the roles of the municipalities and empowering, the different 3 levels of government and coming up with a coordinated approach in terms of being able to resolve and sort out and basically problem solve. So, but we can't do this alone. We need your support, and we need your not-for-profit entities to basically help us with those partnerships. It's about developing those connections locally. It's about connecting the mental health and addictions providers to the tenants that you guys serve. It's about better connecting the clients that you're serving to employment. And how do you guys navigate, and maybe figuring out together what tools are available and how can we better connect to create a whole government approach. I like to reemphasize we can't do this alone. The province, we have a limited funding envelope. We have to figure out how we want to prioritize. In order to prioritize, we have to collaborate. And we have to collaborate with our Indigenous communities to resolve some of our mutual challenges. And we have to figure out how do we empower our Indigenous communities as well. But building on this, in order to take stock of our current assets, we're undergoing the largest RFP building condition assessment review in Manitoba's history. And you probably saw that the province recently issued 2 RFPs and that are involving the entire portfolio for Manitoba Housing. And so this building condition assessments will allow us to take stock of what we currently own, develop a long-term strategic plan in terms of how do we best manage these assets on a go-forward basis, but also being able to provide comprehensive appraisals and determining what the market values are of these assets, figuring out what the appraised affordable rates are, what the market values are, what the rent market values are, and basically trying to determine and having good data to drive good decision making, so we can figure out how we can best empower the not-for-profit sector. Undergoing building condition assessments, if you're new to this process, is something that's generally done by most not-for-profits every 10 years. And it's an industry best practice basically to figure out how to best prioritize capital repairs. It helps us better position us to basically access federal funding, and how to best position our not-for-profit sectors to access additional federal funding directly. It's also will help support in terms of our sponsor management, in terms of when requests are made, in terms of figuring out what are the priorities and how do we best allocate our funding. And also it helps us feed into a very detailed data-driven process to basically make sure that the right investments are going into the right places. And when we're developing long-term capital strategies, because our average age of our capital stock is around 35 years old, it's figuring out how do we best move forward? Does it make sense to divest that building and rebuild new? Does it make sense to make those investments and to bring them back up to where they need to be? And so this is about having good provincial processes that are streamlined, that are cost efficient, that reduce red tape, that basically allow us to capitalize off of our new bilateral national housing strategy. So I want to talk a little bit about and thank the federal government for basically the new funding strategy that they've put in place that'll go and continue till 2027-28. And so it's about working in partnership. And the federal funding, however, does have a number of strings attached to it that doesn't take a look at our base stock. And so we will continue to have those conversations with our federal counterparts and figuring out what can we do to partner together. We're continuing to work with CMHC, and CMHC has been a fantastic partner. We are really glad that CMHC is basically promoting this new strategy and this new bilateral agreement, and we will hopefully have something to announce on that in the near future. The federal funding under the National Housing Strategy, just so folks are aware, is provincially cost matched, and it's towards new affordable and the repair of the existing community stock. And so helping us move forward with these building condition assessments will help us in terms of figuring out how to best prioritize the funds that we're getting in. The funding on the CMHC is back end loaded. So basically the amounts increase over time. And so this is where we will be engaging with our not-for-profit sector to basically how best to prioritize. In terms of the national co-investment, we are very pleased with the Manitoba component. However, we will continue on in terms of very much encouraging our municipal and Indigenous governments to continue or to consider co-investing. And co-investing, it can come in a number of forms. It can come in-kind donations. It can come into other funding mechanisms that you might have, or it can come into considerations of land and those different types of things. And it's figuring out how do we best leverage the assets that we currently own to basically, and that you guys own and everybody else owns, to basically create the most amount of new social housing. It's all about community-based service delivery. We know that the communities in which you guys live in are best positioned to make those decisions locally in terms of what is required from a housing perspective. And so this is where this conversation needs to start from this day forward in terms of how do we enable community-based decision-making and what does that look like? And so as we're moving forward with our transformation sector strategies, and we are developing and formalizing our strategies, is how do we work more in collaborative partnerships with the community-based organizations and not-for-profit providers and other levels of government to provide safe and affordable housing. Safe and affordable housing is important because we know that in the province of Manitoba, we have significant issues around homelessness. And so we are making investments to deal with homelessness, but it's about making sure that any person that needs housing is able to get housing and to get housing that is affordable, because we do know that the cost of housing is going up and incomes are fairly stagnant, specifically with COVID. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you as a leader and a partner inside of the nonprofit and social housing and other levels of government providers. Dealing with COVID has not been an easy challenge. And I would like to recognize that and thank each and every one of you and pass on my greetings to all of your staff and board members that are basically managing these particular and these uncertain, unprecedented times. And I know that as we move forward, building on more collaborative partnerships and reaching out, one of the things I can ask is figure out how do you connect locally? And this is a question I have with all of our nonprofit providers, but even internally with all of our staff, is how do we better enable partnerships? How are we better enabling our clients? How are we better enabling employment of our clients? How are we able to navigate them towards mental health and addictions resources? How are we better managing the kids that are exiting care? And how are we better managing the seniors and encouraging First Nations partnerships? And so these are all questions that I'll post out to the not-for-profit providers. So when we have the opportunity to meet, is how can I help you achieve your goals in terms of meeting those requirements? And so what I do ask is that the different not-for-profits that are out there, if they do want to connect up with our office, I would be pleased to kind of provide some kind of opportunity to at least connect with you virtually given these times. So moving forward, we do know that a number of things need to be done inside of the social housing. Social housing in Manitoba, given the age of the stock, we do need a different approach. And the approach involves you guys as nonprofits, and it's figuring out, because we can't do this alone, how do we want to work together in partnerships? And so basically what I'll leave is, being somebody that's new, I've only been in this role for 3 months, so I bear with me in terms of as we moved along this journey. But what I need to know from the sector is, how do we best provide and support you guys? And I need to hear back from you, and I need to hear back from you directly. And so my challenge to you guys is how do we want to engage these partnerships? And what does that look like? Can I help you guys get, perhaps somebody, one of the resource partners at the table in terms of developing and managing issues local in your community? And so this is about, how do we move forward, and how do we move forward together? So in response to homelessness as well, I did want to kind of acknowledge the fantastic work that is being done currently by our not-for-profit providers, as well as our partners in terms of moving forward. And I know you guys have done a lot of hard work in terms of maintaining your buildings. You've done a lot of hard work in terms of making sure the most vulnerable in our communities are looked after. We still have a lot of work to do, but we can do it together. And that is basically my message. And with regards to homelessness, and I did want to talk about this for a quick second. Securing housing for individuals and homelessness is a complex issue. And this requires local collaboration with all levels of government at the table. And so my question is that in response to this, we know that the Manitoba government has invested an additional $2 million in terms of shelter beds and supports for those experiencing homelessness during these COVID times. But what I need to know is, how do we better partner, and what does that look like? So as somebody that's new, I'm listening, and I want to hear from you. And that concludes my remarks.
Great, thanks, Joe. We have lots of great questions from the audience. I'm going to start with a couple that I came up with. I'm going to take my moderator role. And so one of the questions that we had, so we know that the request for proposals for the building condition assessments and appraisals has gone out, and it's meant to be complete by October 2021. We really appreciate that we're looking at getting some good data for good decision making. I think that's really critical. We're wondering if you have a sense of what the timelines and next steps will be once that report is complete.
So in terms of timelines and next steps with regards to the building condition assessments, so once the RFPs are complete, we'll go through in terms of evaluating the proponents that respond back to it. And because it's open right now, I can't talk specifically about that. But what I can say is that when the building condition assessments are done, we will have to take a look at the assets. And from there, that will drive the transformation plan. And I think, this is where it comes into that information is needed. So if hypothetically, and I'll use the word hypothetically, because I'm speaking with my personal hat and not my government hat. If I was looking at that data and basically data would give me really good information in terms of how to basically hand over assets to willing partners. And so basically that data will basically help inform that type of decision, that conversation with the different providers should hypothetically, we wanted to kind of move forward with that particular strategy. And of course, it'll be up to the government to make that decision. However, that being said, this information will drive the long-term capital planning strategies. It will allow for 20-year capital plans to be developed in a very concise, action-oriented way, because we will have prioritized data that we've never had before in this scale. We do know that, we hear the government talk about the legacy $1 billion capital deferral, and that number is an old number, and it's about figuring out, getting a handle of what is the scale of the deferral and maintenance, and figuring out what is the renewal strategy to make sure that we have sustainable, nonprofit-led housing for the next 50 years. And our housing stock, as folks that may not necessarily know the history with Manitoba Housing, it's been around for 52 years, and we want to make sure that the housing is around for another 50 years. And our strategy is to basically have that data that allows us to basically create a very smart and informed decision in terms of what the future looks like.
Thanks. Then next question is related to decision-making and collaboration. So we've been talking about a move to decentralize public housing management, more community-based service delivery, community-based decision-making. And certainly we've heard from our members that they're strongly supportive of that. We also know that some decisions within government are being centralized. So capital planning and budgeting, there's been some changes within Treasury to move some decisions under Treasury that used to be under the purview of Manitoba Housing. Given that you've been with the corporation for 3 months, you may not know all the ins and outs of the changes, but we're really interested in helping, if you could help us understand the current decision-making processes as they sort of relate to the different arms of government. So within Treasury Board, Central Services, and Manitoba Housing.
One of the unique opportunities when central government centralizes certain processes around capital and maintenance is it provides a opportunity to prioritize the needs of housing in the context of every other major government infrastructure. So you think about hospitals and schools and these other major components, having a centralized process does allow for the needs to be prioritized for the sector. I think, the trade-off, when you look at these types of efficiencies and, is basically it provides an opportunity to find efficiencies in terms of being able to capitalize on the government's broader capital experience in terms of being able to drive large infrastructure pieces out the door. And that's why we're seeing the building condition assessment. It's something that is new, and it's something that has never been done in this scale. And it's about basically providing that opportunity to provide really good processes to make sure that the capital stock that we currently own is maintained in a succinct way that allows us to comply with our long-term agreements and partnerships with the federal government. I also think that there is a trade-off in terms of expenditure management, in terms of having some access to economies of scale. You think about roofs. A roof is a roof is a roof, but when you have the ability to do 1,000 square feet or 1 million versus 1 million square feet of roofing, the pricing comes in sometimes a little sharper, and allows us to maximize the very precious capital dollars that we do have available.
So one more prepared question, and I think we'll move on. We have lots of audience questions, so I want to make sure when we asked our members, how do you want this session to go? They said, make sure we have time for us to ask questions. So I'll ask you one more that I sent in advance. And because I know it's on a lot of our members' mind, and it's the end of operating agreements. So we know that there is funding through the National Housing Strategy to retain affordability through those agreements. And we know that many of those with agreements, especially the post-85 agreement. So for our audience members who aren't super aware, those post-85 agreements are the 100% rent geared to income agreements that will be ending in the next few years. And they're wanting to know what's going to happen with rent geared to income units in the future. We've heard different perspectives. Sometimes we've heard that plans will be made on a building by building basis. Sometimes hearing there'll be a broader strategy for that end of agreement being developed. can you provide any insights? And how can groups prepare, but maybe if they're unsure where to start, what advice would you have for them?
Well, of course, this is a very big question impacting all subsidized housing across the entire country. I can tell you that in Ontario, where I came from, it was been used as an opportunity to leverage these assets to access co-investment funding to basically go on a significant rebuild. So this is one opportunity. There's other opportunities about shifting out to a mixed market approach if that's appropriate. But I mean, it really does come down to a building by building approach. I know that the National Housing Strategy is providing some extra time for housing providers to investigate viable options. And this may include some outside government service provisions and such as human services hubs. I mean, human services hubs are something that is something that is not a new concept, but it's about figuring out what does that look like from a collaborative partnership. And I take a look at maybe an older 40 unit build, and maybe the needs of the community have shifted, and maybe there's a need for more seniors-based programming type specialized housing, or maybe there's a need for a mental health and addictions place for folks that are just struggling, that need a place to go. And this provides such a unique opportunity for those that can get partnerships with other individuals, that basically allows for another agencies, if they can bring those partnerships together, it provides such an opportunity to create really these collaborative hubs models that can really help sustain and basically problem solve with some of the things that we're facing. Because the problems of today were not the same problems that we were dealing with when some of these units were built back in the 1970s. And it's figuring out how do we repurpose some of these assets. And it's about thinking outside of the box. Now that the agreements, some of them have expired, perhaps maybe there's opportunities to basically to figure out how do we best meet the needs of our community locally. And this has to be almost done on a community by community basis. But I think this is an opportunity for people to think about their assets that they own and how do they solve some of the big complex problems that they're seeing on the street.
So I'll put in a plug that we've had a couple of folks who have these agreements asking if we can pull together a group of the post-85 agreements so that they can brainstorm together. So I'll note that we are, for folks who do have those agreements, that we will plan that, and we'll invite you, Joe, and we'll do some brainstorming together, because I think you're right. Sometimes it's building by building, sometimes it's sort of sector wide, what do we need? Sometimes it's bringing in additional partnerships to figure out how we make sure that we make the best use of the limited funding, but also the assets that we've built over the years.
And how do we leverage the other partners that we have at the table? And health has got a big role, but there's also other partners as well. And figuring out how do we bring these folks together in one room and under one tent and create a whole of government approach to basically start solving some of the issues that we see in our community.
Yeah, I think the whole of government approach is certainly something that we're interested in and looking forward to seeing how that goes. I think every government for many years has talked about breaking down silos. This government has clearly talked a lot about a whole of government approach. And when we've talked in the past to the deputy minister about, we talked about business cases and sort of planning for housing, he said, we recognize that there are other costs to other parts of government when housing isn't there. So we need to think about health, about mental health, about seniors and active living, about children and youth, about education. So housing has always been sort of cross-departmental. So we're looking forward to.
We can never forget employment, because a big portion of housing, in terms of the original intent of housing is to basically provide people, support until they can get to the point of being economically independent. And and economic independence is something that we do know, and we've seen in other jurisdictions, that reduces poverty, reduces poverty for children, and how do we use these assets to drive those social goals, to drive really good business cases forward to government, and this is where the sector can get creative, but it's about leveraging those partnerships and figuring out how we can best enable our communities.
So this is a good question sort of following on this. Someone asked, in your previous experience, are there any out-of-province housing models or sector infrastructure setup that you hope to bring or suggest to Manitoba?
I will say, well, it depends on the sector. So, for example, in some First Nations projects that I've had the privilege and the opportunity to partner and collaborate with, we've seen, partnerships where, you have the First Nations community that was engaged around bringing together housing as well as some mental health supports and healthcare primary care supports together, bringing other supports around the table for perhaps children and children's services in terms of what that would be needed, and these are sort of First Nation led projects that are in urban centers. And so those types of collaboration projects, I think, work really well in terms of helping empower, our sector to basically manage, and being in the driver's seat in terms of being able to collectively solve some of the challenges in our communities. And I take a look at around seniors, for example, and I've seen some examples in Sudbury, for example, where you have campuses, and you have campuses where you have long-term care. You've got the full continuum of care for seniors, so because not every senior needs long-term care. Some of them need different levels of support, and it's being able to develop these types of hybrid models, but having it done at a community level, I think, is important. And it's about literally the boards of these nonprofits basically engaging different partners in terms of being able to say, hey, we need this service in this community. Who out there is able to complement what we're doing and partner with those particular providers? But in terms of keeping affordability for the lowest income, I think that is something that is ongoing and is something that is absolutely critical in terms of moving forward. Affordable housing is something that is fundamental. We have service level standards, and we're looking to maintain our service level standards of our stocks.
Thanks, Joe. I know many people will be pleased to hear that. So another question, still on the partnership stream, is that so someone says, great to hear that you speak to the housing needs of youth aging out of care. Currently within Manitoba Housing, youth aging out of care are considered a priority to be housed. One concern with housing units being sponsor managed is that the new housing provider may no longer see youth aging out of care as a priority to be housed. Is there anything that Manitoba Housing could do to ensure that the priorities for housing are the same, whether it's once a nonprofit takes over management?
So it's a very good question, and and thank you very much for whoever submitted that question. Youth aging out of care is a priority for the government, and so we do know that we have a couple strategies that we're working on. I'm part of this youth technical table. Unfortunately, I can't, due to confidentiality of the table, speak to what we're doing because it hasn't been announced yet. But we are working on that, and I think youth aging out of care, I think, is something that I personally believe is something that we need to do better at, and but it involves a partnership, and I think the partnership comes down to is that a lot of these youth exiting care, it's not so much the housing that they need, it's the mentorship and support, so they move towards a pathway which ensures their long-term success. And as someone who kind of lives and breathes this particular issue, I think, when we have individuals exiting care, we need to make sure that, that somebody there is mentoring them and somebody there is providing support. And this is where we would look to the nonprofit sector to kind of partner and try to kind of create those collaborative models where basically we can have very succinct strategy in terms of allowing us to move forward on that strategy so we can have better outcomes.
Great. There's some great models we can look to. So we're looking forward to expanding those as well. The next question Dean asked. So we've talked about, I know we have on one hand groups that are really concerned about maintaining affordability within existing housing. We have other groups wanting to develop new housing. So Dean is with Bethel Place, and he's asking how much of the National Housing Strategy funding within the Manitoba bilateral agreement has been spent to date, and how much is dedicated into future to provide new affordable units. And in particular, he's looking at new affordable units for seniors in independent living situations.
So we will be having an announcement very shortly on this. So I can't speak to the specifics, but what I can say is that when it comes to new housing, there are other options as well. You know, the bilateral provides some initial seed and base funding. However, there is, you know, the co-investment, which I think is a wonderful program in terms of we need more applications going forward around co-investment. There's also High C, and for folks aren't familiar with High C, it's the Housing Investment Corp in terms of their ability to access and provide funding to nonprofit housing providers. Being able to develop new housing. So there are other approaches other than just a government approach. And so what I do suggest is that, you know, as people are moving towards their feasibility in terms of developing new housing, which I strongly encourage, is look at all funding options available. Co-investment's one, High C's one, but there's also figuring out how do they leverage some of the existing assets that they have in terms of being able to drive more housing down the road. And so it's a matter of structuring your deal or structuring the actual project in a way that maximizes the existing assets that you do have, and also looks at, you know, what are the other funding options out there. And the National Housing Strategy is one part of it. The National Housing Strategy is very prescriptive, so it does, and it builds over time. So there'll be more money over time. The other challenges is how do we maintain our existing infrastructure that we do have now? I mean, you know, Manitoba Housing has over 16,000 units of housing, direct owned at the current moment. And how do we best maintain that infrastructure so that maintains that we're maintaining our federal agreements service level standards? And I think that's the key. You know, when we move forward on any of these types of projects and we move forward on terms of new housing stock, there are a number of options. I mean, I do strongly encourage people to access the CMHC seed funding process. I mean, that is one mechanism that is available, and get the proper business cases together, develop your pro formas, and then start looking at different funding options. And that's when you can approach us, you can approach the federal government, you can approach High C, and figuring out what is the best pathway based on the numbers that you're seeing. I've also seen some pretty creative models in other markets, and markets where we're going to call them social enterprise for purpose. And I'll talk about that for a quick second since I've got a little bit of a segue. And the way social enterprise for purpose works is that you can, as a not-for-profit, leverage, and nobody says you have to be 100% completely RGI. You can have a new build, and your new build could potentially sustain itself with having a number of for-profit units subsidizing your affordable units. And it's an interesting strategy where you can leverage potentially your existing assets, but your existing credit rating and your existing credit could be available to these entities. And it's one strategy that I think is actually something that I don't see very much in this market. And that's something I'm hoping to see more of in the future. And that is basically social enterprises where you're able to leverage, you know, your assets and leverage, you know, some private sector for-profit builds inside of your own nonprofit entity to basically subsidize your affordable. And so there are opportunities here for nonprofit boards to basically engage in that type of activity.
There's one group, so this is a connection with a question that someone asked. There's a group that we've actually been working with, or in touch with, I should say, who's interested in new development. And they've been thinking about how to access some of this funding. And one of the things that they've seen is that without any existing equity, so they're a new nonprofit group, they're wanting to develop some seniors housing in their community. They're they're not sure where to start in terms of partnering to leverage some of the CMHC funding. So they've looked at CMHC funding, you require some type of equity to get started. They've looked at Manitoba Housing, there's nothing clearly available for them. There's nothing clearly available within the city. So they're thinking about how they can, as a new group, develop some housing. Where should they start?
Well, I would say find a partner local with another nonprofit and figure out, you can leverage their expertise to help develop your business case. The seed funding is one element, in terms of, have that conversation locally with, because, we have over 300 nonprofit housing providers in Manitoba, and I'm surely one of them would love to partner with with this particular group, especially if they're very passionate about getting something built. We're all in the business of building and maintaining that infrastructure, and there's a lot of passion out there. Harness the willing that are interested in partnering with you, and who knows, this might turn into something bigger.
That's awesome. That is the same advice that I gave them. So I'm glad we're on the same page. So they're reaching out to other groups. If there's anyone on the call that wants to partner on a new development in Winnipeg, let us know and we'll make some connections there. There's another question about the Rapid Housing Initiative. And I know it's new and under development, but how does the partner see their role with involvement with the Rapid Housing Initiative?
So we are awaiting the federal government to release information on that particular initiative. We do know, and we are quite pleased that the federal government has announced $1 billion Canada-wide for the rapid rehousing. We're waiting for details, just like everybody else, but we will have some information, hopefully, that the federal government will be sharing in the very near future.
Have you had any conversation? Lissy Rappaport from End Homelessness Winnipeg asked a very similar question. Is the province sort of thinking about what role they can play? Do you have any thoughts yet on how you can, because the funding we think will need to be committed before March 31st, so it'll be a very quick turnaround. Have you thought about how the government might be able to help groups to make sure that we get the benefit from some of that funding?
Well, we've done some preliminary thought processes internally in terms of what that might look like, but we await the federal government guidelines. And without federal government direction, it's their money, and it's hard to make decisions based on that. So we're expecting some information very soon, and we have a call scheduled coming up in the near future.
Great. We're excited to working together on it.
And all the provinces are in the same boat.
Another question, last one on sort of new development, is Coral from Westgoyne Housing Co-op is asking if the province will renew efforts to support co-op development.
Co-op development. Well, co-op is a sector that's very important in the context of the national housing. I mean, we are looking for different opportunities, but the co-op housing model is slightly different than the affordable housing model, like the traditional affordable housing model. So I would say let's have a dialogue and let's see where we can go from there.
So speaking of co-op development, I believe that this question is from one of our members at Old Grey. So he's wondering when the province will lift the 2019 freeze on median market rents for nonprofit housing.
So I would defer the median market rent data. It comes from CMHC. So a lot of that information will have to be determined is probably the answer.
Okay, done. To be determined. So the next few questions are around transferring housing to the nonprofit sector, potentially, or new portfolio management agreements. One person asked, sponsor management agreements. Someone asks, will there be equal opportunities for all nonprofit housing organizations, no matter what their size, for increasing their portfolio through this transition?
Well, that is a very good question. And I would say that as we move forward, I would be looking for equitable and disproportionately based models. is probably the answer.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, equitable meaning that you would want an equal process, and disproportionate meaning that based on the population size and demographics.
Got it. So it will be based on the community, and equitable based on the a fair process, but depends on the size of the community and the sector within that community.
Yep. That's my personal thinking, not necessarily, and of course, it's subject to government direction.
So this is a pretty similar, or it's on the same stream. This person asks how a nonprofit that has not been connected to Manitoba Housing in the past, how can they ensure they're being notified when RFPs are released by your department? And wondering if there's room for unsolicited applications.
So I can tell you that our RFP process is fairly transparent and open. Generally, there's media releases for our RFPs. So my suggestion is that they get on our distribution list for media releases, and they will be notified when an RFP goes out, if and when.
Sounds good. We do pay attention to them as well. So if you don't get the MAMFA newsletter, we recommend that you sign up. So typically we get them, we're on all the lists, but also we usually get them directly from our colleagues at our contacts at Manitoba Housing. So we'll make sure to share those whenever they come out. So we have two more questions and then we'll wrap up. So Cody asks about, with Manitoba Housing units being transferred across the nonprofit sector, it's harder and harder for people to apply for housing. Would Manitoba Housing consider supporting a centralized application or intake process for rent geared to income and or affordable housing?
Well, that would be the question I would probably put out to the nonprofit sector. And for me, it's about, being 3 months in, listening to what the sector wants and needs. And I've heard the idea before. It's available in some other jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions have a centralized list, some don't. And one of the things that would be quite helpful for me is hearing from other nonprofits in terms of what would help them be successful. And what does that look like? And so I'll flip the question around saying that I would love feedback in terms of what does that look like if we had a centralized wait list here, what does that look like? And is it strictly based on needs? Is it based on region? Is it, what does it look like? And I would think that, being fairly new, I'm open to any new suggestions and new ideas, in terms of anything that drives more efficiency in the sector and that allows us to be more effective at what we do.
We've had, so through our sector transformation committee, our board and our members have prioritized a centralized application and waitlist. But as you say, there's lots of details to be worked out there. So we're looking forward to moving forward on that. We don't have a lot of sector services right now. So groups haven't experienced sharing services. And I think it's going to be awesome. Some people are, there's fear with that type of change. So we're looking forward to seeing how it goes and how we can get an application in place and demonstrate that sharing services is going to work really well.
Absolutely.
So our last question is, I see one more question popped up about contact information. Joe, do you mind if we share your contact information?
Sure, perfect. Yeah, if you want to share my email address, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so we'll share that with folks. And then the last question is, does the province have any intention of improving and supporting better accessibility in housing units? Accessible and universal design will be key for including individuals with disabilities, and there's substantial need for aging in place friendly housing.
And I think that that is a very important question. And I think, we think about all of our legacy builds, and they were built 35 years ago where the standards were different. And I would strongly encourage, any new builds that they comply with the latest and exceed the accessibility standards. So as you're thinking about any redevelopments, any large construction projects or rehabilitation on any of your sites, is that that we kind of look to the stretch goal of exceeding the accessibility requirements.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and for joining us for the questions. You look like you're in a small closet or a small office at the legislature. This is very different from our typical conference structure. And we're just so thrilled that you could join us for it.
I would like to reiterate and thank MEMFA and all of your members for all of the support for the first 3 months that I've been here. Hopefully I'll have an opportunity to meet with a lot more of you as time goes on. With COVID, it's a little bit trickier, so I appreciate the new technology of having video link ups, and so I mean that's quite helpful for me in terms of being able to get out and meet people. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I wish you guys success with your conference. I was looking at the agenda and it looks exciting, and I admire the knowledge sharing and the sharing of best practices. I think is something that I encourage, and being a part of different national conferences on housing, it's these types of conferences are very important in terms of making sure that folks have an opportunity to kind of learn from each other, but also grow together as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next sessions. So we're at our time. I have to say that this was a very different experience from usual. So usually at our conference, there's lots of noise and there's energy. And here I'm actually I'm in office literally by myself staring at a screen. And I really miss seeing all of you. I miss spending days sitting together and chatting about housing. Rest assured that we'll be seeing more of you in our more interactive conference sessions each month, and we can't wait until we can get together again face to face. Again, we'll be sending the video from this launch, including all the links that we've sent out today and information about the next conference series. We have a couple of last polls to ask you for some feedback about the conference so that we can help you can help us prepare for the next few months. So the next poll that should pop up is, if you haven't registered for the conference, what is the reason? If you haven't registered for the conference, it's because, so it could be that you've been too busy, you've gotten too many emails maybe, so you haven't been able to take a look at it, you plan to but need a reminder, can't commit to the schedule. So can't commit to the schedule, and note that we do have, if you do register, you would get a video from the sessions. And we have a pretty flexible cancellation policy this year. For some, it might be too expensive, or maybe we don't have sessions that are relevant. I see lots of people saying other reason. So if there is another reason, please do put that in the chat box just to help us if it is something that we can address. There might not be anything that we can do about it, but if there is something that we can do about it, please do let us know. So we'll leave the poll for a couple more seconds. Looks like the majority of folks plan to but need a reminder. Or there's another reason. So the plan to is great, we can deal with it. The other reason, let us know what that reason is and if there's something that we can do about it. Okay, we can close that poll. And then so you can see plan to but need a reminder is most common. We'll send you, this is your reminder, we'll send you more of them. And our last poll for today is just to help us know where you get information about the conference. We're asking, where did you hear about today's launch? So you might have heard about it at a few different places. So if it's more than one, you can select those. Just let us know where you've heard. So it looks like the most common so far is our newsletter. That's great. Or We have lots of sponsors joining us today. Thank you. Some sponsors heard about it because of that. So about 80% have voted. Some folks were referred by colleagues. Excellent. Okay, so we can close that poll. So the majority are our newsletter and then sponsors. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that information. That's really helpful for us. Okay, so a last reminder of what's coming up next. We'll have a PowerPoint come up. So our next event for the conference is coming up November 10th. As I mentioned, it's going to be a panel. It's hosted by Steve Pomeroy. For folks who are housing nerds like me, you'll know Steve does a lot of writing and research on housing. He's going to be talking about the possibilities and pitfalls of a funding model that would simplify agreements and that could potentially provide household-based subsidies rather than the existing operating agreement model. So we're going to have international experts sort of commenting on their models, what they've learned, what we should avoid, what we could do differently. And then on November 17th, we're having an interactive workshop where you can meet each other and discuss good practices for budgeting. We're going to practice some budget scenarios. It's going to be, you're going to be in breakout rooms, you're going to see each other a lot. There's going to be spreadsheets involved, so get ready, it's going to be great. And then on November 24th, we're having a pop-up event. So it's CMHC hour on November 24th. We're going to have, CMHC is going to update us on any funding streams available. Hopefully by then we'll also have some information on the Rapid Housing Initiative. We'll definitely have information on the Housing Supply Challenge, which is, I think, open, I think today might be the launch day. You can check out information on our trade show. So you can register for that series, or you can register for the full conference. It's open on our website. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss anything. And thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you in November.